There are many ways to measure the legacy of the British Empire in Malaysia. You might look to the railway lines still winding through the jungle, the courtrooms where wigs cling stubbornly to relevance, or the aging clubhouses with their sleepy verandas and occasional echo of billiard balls. But there's another legacy, far less official, yet far more tasty. It lives in your kitchen, or your grandmother's, or the back of your local sundry shop. Tins and jars, wrappers and boxes, relics of Britannia's pantry, now adopted and adapted in ways no colonial governor-general could have imagined. These are the foods that the British brought to Malaya's tropical shores, and Malaysians never let go of them. Some are still revered, some have been reinterpreted, some have gone native, but all are still very much here. So, drop a spot of Milkmaid in your Ovaltine and join me as we savor the flavors that outlasted the empire. 10 British foods that colonized Malaya. We start with that most singular of British culinary curiosities, Marmite. Marmite divides households, friendships, and occasionally colonial dominions. For condiments so quintessentially British, it is in truth a rather un-British invention. Conceived in the late 19th century not by a mustachioed gentleman from deepest Surrey, but by a German scientist, the estimable Justus von Liebig, who had a rather alarming idea of concentrating and bottling brewer's yeast and suggesting it be eaten. To compound this scandal, the name Marmite is itself a French term, referring to a stout-lidded cooking pot, an indignity only partially redeemed by the fact that it is still sold to this day in the classic form of that distinctive bulbous jar. First finding its way onto British breakfast tables in 1902, Marmite has ever since been consumed with equal parts of relish and disgust. It is the veritable durian of the British world. Typically spread, and woe-betide the heavy-handed, in the thinnest of layers on toast, biscuits or crackers. I myself hold a particular fondness for light scrape atop grilled cheese on toast, a breakfast fit for minor nobility. It may also be stirred in to liven up insipid stews and casseroles. Elsewhere in the empire, Marmite had sallied forth and colonized local cuisines. In Malaya, Marmite was enjoyed stirred into rice porridge, a delicacy I have quite vivid memories of enjoying as a very young child. It is also in an intensely savory dish called Marmite chicken, consisting of fried pieces of chicken tossed in a Marmite sauce. The British never meant it to be stir-fried with chicken, but then again, they never expected to lose Malaya either. Australia, ever the wayward colony, responded in the 1920s to shortages in Marmite imports from England as a result of the First World War by concocting its own knockoff. This was Vegemite, a dark pretender whose very mention may trigger pistol duels at breakfast tables over which of the two is the superior. After Marmite, we now come to the hard stuff, Bovril. Bovril is less a foodstuff and more a statement, a bold declaration that one can only be prepared to face the day fortified not by coffee or tea, but by the essence of a cow rendered unto liquid form. Like so many of Britain's most peculiar consumables, Marmite was born not in a kitchen, but in the fevered mind of a Victorian Scotsman, one John Lawson Johnston, who in the 1870s patented a way to preserve beef extract in concentrated shelf-stable form. Originally named Johnston's Fluid Beef, it was wisely rebranded as Bovril, a portmanteau of bos, the Latin for ox, and vril, which was a fictional life force drawn from a then wildly popular but now mercifully forgotten Victorian science fiction novel. Bovril quickly became a fixture in military rations, Arctic expeditions, and the half-time drinks trolley at British football matches. It was consumed not only as a drink, but stirred into stews, spread on toast, and administered to unsuspecting children with weak constitutions and no recourse to protest. In Malaya, Bovril took on new life, its beefy essence deployed in ways that would have confounded its original inventors. It was served hot in kopitiams, sometimes seasoned with pepper or soy sauce, a sort of tropical beef tea for the weary worker or early rising lorry driver. It also found its way into rice porridge and noodle soups. If Marmite was a curious guest at the breakfast table, Bovril was a permanent resident, robust, unapologetic, and always a little too warm. Bovril still lingers in the East, a reminder that the Empire, for all its pomp, also brought with it a curious appetite for not only sipping tea, but sipping beef as well. And in Malaya, this concept of liquefying livestock and drinking it for strength was embraced with such vigor that it spawned a local legend of its own, Brand's Essence of Chicken. Sold in tiny glass bottles and promising everything from mental clarity to physical vigor, it quickly became the tonic of choice for exam sitters, postnatal mothers, and those generally weary of life. Bovril may have paved the way, but Malayans took the idea and ran with it, presumably after finishing their beef tea. Ovaltine occupies a curious corner of British culinary nostalgia, somewhere between a bedtime beverage and a parental placebo. It was first concocted in 1904 by a Swiss chemist, and like so many things the British would come to claim as their own, was promptly anglicised, mass-marketed and pressed into imperial service. A powdered blend of malt, milk, eggs, cocoa, and the promise of good behaviour, Ovaltine was less a drink than a campaign, to nourish, to quieten, and essentially sedate children down by 8 p.m. With its reassuring promise of restful sleep, it quickly became a staple of British pantries, boarding schools, and sanatoriums. It was also considered as one of the earliest energy drinks by explorers and adventurers, with large quantities of it being hauled by poor Sherpas during the first conquest of Mount Everest in 1953. In Malaya, Ovaltine arrived with the Empire, but took on a new life. No longer confined to bedtime, Ovaltine was served iced, frothy, and sometimes so thick one required digging it with a spoon. It was not uncommon to encounter it in a kopitiam glass larger than your head, sugared beyond reason, and drunk as a tonic, dessert, and beverage, all in one. But Ovaltine's reign was not to last. In the post-war years, the throne was usurped by a colonial cousin from the Antipodes, Milo, the chocolatey upstart from Australia. While Ovaltine gently nourished, Milo swaggered in with energy, sports sponsorships, and eventually that great Malaysian invention, the Milo Dinosaur, a colossal ice drink buried under an avalanche of undissolved powder. The dinosaur practically has to be chewed as well as drunk. Ovaltine still lurks in supermarket aisles, much diminished, less dominant, but not forgotten. For many like me, it remains the cocoa of first memories. Horlicks was invented in the late 19th century by two British-born brothers in Wisconsin. Yes, America, of all places. It was marketed as a nutritious malted milk for infants, invalids, the aged, and travelers, and quickly became a fixture in hospitals, boarding schools, and situations requiring firm but gentle sedation. Parents offered it to fussy toddlers before bedtime. Once a child had finally been coaxed to sleep, and the toys cleared away, a quiet swig of Horlicks was often the last resort of an exhausted parent hoping to nod off before the next crisis. Whether or not it actually worked was beside the point. It was a ritual. It was and remains the beverage equivalent of a warm flannel towel to the face. Despite its mild manner, the name Horlicks eventually took on a most unsoothing meaning. In British slang, to make a Horlicks of something means to make a complete mess, a shambles, a muddle, a well-intentioned disaster. Why this gentle drink was chosen to symbolize chaos remains unclear, but one suspects it had something to do with the state of the kitchen table after trying to prepare it with one hand while holding a wriggling, howling child in the other. Today, Horlicks still lines the supermarket shelves. No longer the evening essential it once was, but never entirely absent either. In Malaysia, they have even taken the concept further, where Horlicks was also sold as milky chocolate-flavoured discs in paper packets, which were then eaten as candy. It is, after all, more than just a drink. It is the end-of-the-day dose of quiet resignation, mild redemption, and sweet relief, all stirred gently in hot water and taken just before bed. Few British exports have achieved the quiet dominance of the Jacob's cream cracker. A biscuit so plain, so dry, so tasteless, it might easily be mistaken for packing material, if not for its curiously wild popularity across generations, peoples, and continents. First baked in 1885 by William and Robert Jacob in Dublin, the cream cracker was neither creamy nor particularly crackery. In fact, try cracking one in two, and it's more likely to disintegrate into 1,000 tiny crumbs that will take you all day to hoover up. But it was, critically, shelf-stable, stackable, and possessed the unique talent of surviving long sea voyages without crumbling into oblivion. It was the perfect colonial companion, emotionally reserved, slightly too dry, but ready and able to endure even the harshest of dangerous sea voyages and tropical climates with aplomb. In Britain, it was eaten with butter, a whisper of cheese, or, in moments of daring, a dab of pickle. In Malaya, however, cracker flourished. Jacob's became a staple of breakfast tables, high teas, and supper snacks. It was served with kaya, dipped in Milo, crumbled into porridge, or eaten plain as comfort food. As a child, I liked mine generously spread with margarine, with a thin sprinkling of sugar on top. So widespread was its adoption that many Malaysians grew up assuming Jacob's was a local brand, a homegrown heritage biscuit, not a starchy ambassador of the British Empire. Indeed, by the late 20th century, Jacob's crackers were manufactured locally under license, thus completing their naturalization. They are now as Malaysian as the act of reusing its tin for sewing supplies. And so the cream cracker endures, square, sensible, and still tasting of absolutely nothing. Long may it flake. Ribena, for many, is less a beverage than a haunting memory, a sticky, violet-hued memory that clings to your childhood like the ring it usually left at the bottom of your glass. It was born in 1938, the brainchild of Dr. Vernon Charley at the University of Bristol, who extracted vitamin C from blackcurrants and performed the impossible. He turned it into something children might actually consume. During the Second World War, when oranges fell to Nazi conquest, Ribena was pressed into national service, promoted as the wartime miracle juice that would keep British children from developing scurvy and collapsing into heaps of rickets. But like so many imperial exports, Ribena outgrew its homeland. It arrived in Malaya with the promise of a health tonic and the appeal of a high-sugar delivery system. And here it truly thrived. In Malaysia, Ribena was no longer a medicinal supplement. It was an elixir of celebration. Served icy cold in plastic tumblers the size of your face, or frozen into homemade iced lollies by cunning aunties, it became the taste of school holidays, tuck shop lunches, weddings, birthday parties, sport events, festive gatherings. More often than not, it was diluted to near homeopathic levels, though this would often be more than offset by many diabetes-inducing tablespoons of sugar. Parents swore by its health benefits, despite the alarming levels of sugar and the minuscule amount of vitamins actually present in the solution. And while today's health-conscious youth may sneer at Ribena, those of us of a certain age still remember it as a rite of passage, the official drink of childhood. So, let's raise a glass for Ribena, diluted of course. While no one may drink it for health anymore, we still drink it for the memories. Cadbury was the velvet-gloved emissary of empire that slyly won Malayan hearts by way of its purple foil-wrapped charm and doses of joy in square blocks. Like Ovaltine, it was a reminder that the British, if nothing else, knew how to comfort the colonies with cocoa. Born in Birmingham in 1905, Cadbury's greatest innovation was to create a bar so creamy, so generously milk-laden, that it made all previous chocolates taste like wartime soap. With its promise of a glass and a half of milk, an iconic purple wrapper, Cadbury quickly became the genteel face of British indulgence, refined and upright in appearance, yet so deliciously naughty. When it reached Malaya, it was no longer just a sweet, it was a status symbol. An imported Cadbury bar, often hand-carried by relatives abroad, or purchased at great cost from the air-conditioned inner sanctums of Cold Storage or Robinson's, it was treated not unlike jewelry. It was displayed, admired, and only eaten under conditions of great ceremony, often broken into squares and distributed with the solemnity of communion. Later, when local production began, Cadbury became more accessible, but never quite ordinary. Whether wrapped around fruit and nut, almonds, it remained the go-to chocolate for birthdays, courtship, apologies, bribes, and emotional well-being. Like all good colonial imports, Cadbury adapted to our local sweet tooth. Malaysian versions came sweeter and softer, and therefore more prone to melting in one's school bag or pocket under our tropical sun. But it was still unmistakably Cadbury. Even today, it remains the default answer to the question, what chocolate shall I get her? Unless, of course, one is attempting to impress a Belgian. Wall's ice cream began, improbably, in a butcher's shop in London. In 1922, faced with plummeting sausage sales during the warmer months, one ingenious Mr. Wall had the idea to keep his staff employed by selling ice cream instead, a pivot that would transform British summers and, eventually, colonial ones too. When Walls arrived in Malaya, it did not do so with pomp or proclamation. It came humbly, on a bicycle, or more precisely, a tricycle, topped with a large insulated icebox, and pedalled tirelessly through the kampongs and housing estates of a tropical nation that didn't know it needed a frozen pasty milk until it tasted it. What followed was legend. At the first faint ring of the ice cream bell, children would erupt from houses, drains, and football fields, clutching coins in sweaty palms, forming an ever-tightening circle around the world's bicycle like worshippers at a travelling shrine. The red and white logo, the clanging bell, the promise of cold and creamy delight. It was magic on wheels. The offerings were simple but unforgettable. Vanilla cups with wooden spoons that gave the ice cream a faint taste of tree bark. Ice lollies of all shapes, hues and flavours, ranging from strawberry to durian. It required no cutlery, no decorum, and no refrigerator of your own. Just a bell, a coin, and a mad dash from wherever you are. And even as air-conditioned supermarkets and multinational ice cream brands entered the scene, the memory of walls on a bicycle endures. And while the bikes are nearly now extinct, replaced by freezers and franchisees, that sound, that bell, that feeling, it still lives somewhere in the back of your mind, where it always is a hot day and the ice cream never melts too fast. Condensed milk was never truly loved in Britain. At best it was tolerated, an emergency substitute for fresh milk during wartime, rationing, inconvenient weather, or when you can't be bothered to go down to the shops. Its tin was stowed in bomb shelters, pantries, and at the backs of kitchen cupboards, where it lurked as a sort of edible insurance policy, just in case the cow exploded. But in Malaya, condensed milk was not a backup. It was the main event. And it made perfect sense. Fresh milk never stood a chance in the tropics. It was unreliable, perishable, and suspicious. Even the bravest colonial officer balked at a cup of tea swimming with milk that had bred whole nations of bacteria in the sun. What was needed was dairy that wouldn't smell, sour, and curdle in the face of humidity, heat, or an inattentive pantry boy. Enter sweetened condensed milk. It is thought to have been invented in the mid-19th century by American Gail Borden, in response to the search for shelf-stable food for soldiers during the American Civil War. Before long, other armies took to it, and condensed milk arrived in the colonies to provide a safe, long-lasting milk substitute for British troops and colonial officers starved of cow's milk. The Milkmaid brand of condensed milk, for example, was first introduced by the Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company in 1866 and soon became synonymous with condensed milk. It was quickly adopted by the locals as the default dairy of choice. It didn't curdle, didn't spoil, and most importantly, made everything that it was poured on taste like dessert. In Britain, one might drizzle it cautiously over fruit or scones. In Malaya, we cast such restraint to the monsoon winds. We poured it into tea, stirred it into coffee, drenched shaved ice with it, fortified Milo with it, even made sandwiches with it. It became the secret weapon of roadside stalls, railway canteens, tuck shops, and street drink carts. It gave kopi its edge, Tarik its theatrical richness, and children an early introduction to dental clinics. While the British eventually returned to the green and pleasant land of fresh milk and skimmed virtue, condensed milk never left Malaya. It's still here, thick, sticky, unapologetically sweet. A reminder that sometimes the best colonial legacies come in tins, not treaties. And should you doubt its impact, try making teh tarik without it. There are many things one might associate with childhood in colonial and post-colonial Malaya. kampong adventures, icy bowls of iced kacang, or a rattan cane stored menacingly behind the door. But for a particular generation, nothing conjures up youthful memories more vividly than the slow, glutinous descent of Scott's emulsion down the back of your throat. And trust me, it's not a fond memory. Invented in 1874 by Alfred B. Scott, a British entrepreneur with apparently no personal regard for flavour, Scott's emulsion was a blend of cod liver oil, lime, glycerine, calcium, and parental obligation. Packed in a distinctive glass bottle and bearing the unforgettable image of a storm-drenched fisherman carrying a giant fish over his shoulder, presumably towards a cowering child, the emulsion marched into British colonies across Asia and Africa, and in Malaya it found a most enthusiastic reception. Administered by mothers, grandmothers, and health officials with missionary zeal, Scott's emulsion became a daily ritual in countless Malayan households. The milky white fishy sludge was solemnly poured onto tablespoons as children looked on in dread, with parents offering unconvincing promises of boundless strength and radiant health if it could just be swallowed in one brave gulp. One might escape chores, homework, even school, but one did not escape Scott's. Whether or not it made children healthier is debatable, but it certainly made them more resilient. Generations of Malaysians can recall the taste with stunning accuracy decades later, a memory filed somewhere between first visit to the dentist and falling off your bicycle into a longkang. Today, Scott's emulsion still exists, though now it's strangely fish-free and promoted with the gentler language of immunity support and vitamin blends. The fish-bearing man still adorns the label, though one suspects he's been quietly rebranded as a personal trainer. And so, in the great culinary ledger of the empire, Scott's emulsion deserves its own page. Not quite food, not quite medicine, but the very epitome of British colonial rule. Forcibly administered, experienced with a grimace, a gag, and the unconvincing assurance that it's for your own good. So there you have it, the colonial relics still lingering in the Malaysian kitchen, brought to this country with the rising tide of British imperialism, and simply refusing to leave when that tide ebbed. Some have been tweaked to taste, some have been completely transformed, others are lovingly preserved in their original tins. But all have survived long after the Union flag was lowered and the last colonial officer caught the boat home. So the next time you sip Horlicks in a quiet moment, or nibble on a sweet block of Cadbury chocolate, remember, you are part of a culinary legacy that began with empire and ended with adoption, adaptation, and a little sweetened milk. The British may have left the country, but what about their biscuits, drinks, and beef tea? Oh, thank God, they're still right here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this little bite of Malayan history, do support my channel by liking, subscribing, and commenting below. Until my next video tidbit, cheerio.